Hey everyone, welcome to my second of two videos on this, the Asahi Pentax SV, also called the H3V. In the first video, we went over what everything on the camera is, and in this video, we're going to talk about how to use everything except the self-timer, since we've already covered that in the first video, to use it to take photos. The first thing is that as an interchangeable lens camera, you can replace the lenses on this camera at any time when you're not taking a photo, and it will not affect your film negatively. Your film will be fine. All you have to do is unscrew the lens, just like that. And when you get your other lens, just screw it back in. The lens should screw in very easily because it's M42. The thread should go right into the raceways. There's only one correct way to do it, and it doesn't click into place, but it should just kind of stop when the focusing indicator is on top of your camera, about like this, and then you know you've properly mounted your lens. It can take any M42 lens with, I think, the exception of a couple of the Mamiyas, but if you're using a Takumar M42 lens, you're gonna be just fine with this camera, okay? This is also, by the way, fun fact, off topic, but this is also the only Pentax camera that I'm aware of that can take some of the German-made M42 lenses that were for the German cameras. But at any rate, now that we've changed out the film, now that we've changed out the lenses, let's talk about how to load film. And loading film is a pretty easy process with this camera. We're gonna open up the camera back just like this, and we're going to grab our roll of 35mm film, lift up the post, drop in the 35mm film, push the post down, pull out a leader, slide the tip of the leader into the film take-up spool over here, just like, not exactly like that, you should probably do it correctly, but just like that, not like that either. I'm showing you all the ways not to do this. In my defense, this film that I'm using is 50 years old, and it's a bit stiff. Okay, there we go. So we've got the film loaded and being taken up on the take-up spool like that. We're going to close the back of the camera. At this point, if you want to set a reminder for yourself, just adjust the memo dial to whether you're using color film or black and white, and the speed. Or, like I said, like I do, masking tape or frog tape on the back. I think that's a bit better. Next, we're going to advance the film to the first frame. While we're doing that, I'm going to take a little bit of slack out of the film here, and I want you to notice what this rewind knob does while I advance the film. As you can see, it's moving in the opposite direction of the arrow that's on top of it, and that's because the film is being taken out of the cassette in this direction toward the take-up spool, and it's spinning the film rewind knob as it goes. So we're going to go through our day, and we're going to take our photos just like this, and we're going to go through our entire roll of film. Okay, and we're going to get to the end. It's going to be time to rewind that film. Now, there's an important thing about film to understand, which is that it is one and done. It can record film, it can record light a single time, and it can do so with a proper aperture and proper shutter speed to create an image on the film, or it can do so by recording every photon that comes its way by opening the back of the camera like this. Once film absorbs all the photons it can by doing something like this, it can never record more photons. So if you open up your camera door while you have film loaded in the camera like this, you will erase every single photo that's on the film. You will also erase every potential photo that could be taken because the film will absorb all the photons it can, and it will be completely useless. But I want you to see what happens to film when you take photos with this camera. So when you advance the film, here's the fresh film that's in the cassette. It gets pulled into the area in front of the shutter curtain. You take the photo, and then it gets advanced past the shutter curtain toward the take-up spool. And it just keeps going and going, taken up on the take-up spool. When you're done with your film for the day, you press the film rewind button on the bottom. And now I'm going to flip out the film rewind lever, and then I'm just going to start rewinding. Now, remember, keep the film door closed while you rewind the film, but I want you to see how the rewind mechanism works. You rewind the film and it physically rewinds, and this little gear here that I was showing you in the last video, can't move backward, is now moving backward. When you get to the end of the film, there you go. The tension, you should feel a little bit of a tension change here, and then you completely rewind the film. After you've completely rewound the film, then you open up the back of the camera, lift the post, turn the camera, drop the film into your hand, drop the film in, oh, come on. Drop the film into your hand. Okay, lift out the film with your fingers. Sorry, okay. If you're just starting out, it's a good idea not to leave a leader on the film. Rewind it completely, that way you don't accidentally reuse the film and end up with double exposures you don't want on that film. But when you're done, you've removed your film, now you can either drop your film into a new roll of film into the camera and repeat the process, or if you're done for the day, close the back of the camera, make sure to trigger the shutter, and you can set your camera off to the side until you need to use it again. All right, so next thing we want to talk about is how to use a flash. The first thing we're going to talk about is actually the mechanics of setting up your camera to use a flash. And we're going to come here to the top, and what you want to do is set your camera to the X, okay? Any flash you use today is going to be an X-Sync flash. So you want to use the X setting. You cannot use anything faster, and I'm going to explain to you why. The way that a focal plane shutter works is that there are two curtains in it. When you take a photo at the flash sync speed of 1/50th, the first curtain opens, it reaches the other side of the shutter area, the flash fires at that point, and then the shutter curtain closes. The entire film plane in that scenario will be open to light for about 1/50th of a second. Okay, second curtain closes. When you advance the film, it arms the shutter and resets the curtains. Okay, that's interesting, but what if I were to do an eighth of a second? Well, it's the same basic process. The first curtain opens. As soon as it gets to the far side of the image area, the flash fires. The film is exposed to light for about an eighth of a second, and then the second curtain closes, and then you advance the film and reset them. Okay, but for this photo, I need to use 1/1000th of a second. You're just not going to get a flash because the first curtain opens after 1/1000th of a second. The second curtain comes in behind it and follows very close behind it. The flash would then fire right here. Everything behind the second curtain will be blocked from the light. It'll be unexposed, and you'll just have a little slit of image off to the side of your frame. Shutter speed is not controlled by the speed at which the curtains move. The curtains always move at the exact same speed. Shutter speed is controlled by the time that is between the first and the second curtain. At 1/1000th of a second, 1/1000th of a second elapses between when the first curtain starts moving and when the second curtain starts moving. At a full second, 1 full second elapses between when the first curtain starts moving and then when the second curtain starts moving. The curtains travel across the opening in a fraction of a second, and regardless of your shutter speed, they move across the opening at the exact same speed. So this right here just controls the length of time between the first and second curtain, and that's why anything faster than 1/50th, you will not have a full frame exposed to light all at one time, so you can't use a flash and get a full exposure. Understanding that, how do we actually use a flash? Well, there's a couple of different ways. One of them is with the cold shoe adapter that Pentax used to include or make for their cameras. And does this one fit in this camera? No, it does not. Really? The Spotmatics? Oh, it does. Okay. I thought this had the exact same viewfinder as the Spotmatics do. This actually came off of a Spotmatic SL. So at any rate, you can use one of these clips. This is a cold shoe clip. It cannot trigger a flash. So why am I using this clip to hold my flash if I can't even trigger it? Well, the way that you trigger a flash with this camera is with the flash PC port down here. You take your flash PC cable, which stands for Pront or Comper, you plug it into the X-Sync port, and then you connect this to your flash if your flash has a cable connection. This one doesn't, otherwise I'd show you. Remember, do not use the FP port because the timing will be wrong. With the FP port, even if you use your flash sync speed, your flash will fire before the shutter curtain starts moving on, I think, all of the shutter speeds with this camera, and so you will just not get flash exposure. If your flash has a reusable bulb, you must use X, okay? The next thing I want to talk about with flash, now that we know we have to connect it to this port via a cable, is some technique. The worst possible place to put a flash is right here on top of the lens pointing toward your subject. The reason is because when you take your photo, the light from the flash will leave in like this wall of light, reach your subjects, bounce back, and like this flat wall of light will cause your subjects to look very flat. It's also going to give them a waxy look, and in color photography, it will give them red eye. None of that's a good look that you want for your subjects, okay? So what you can do, there are some things you can do with a flash to mitigate that. Let's assume that the only place you can put the flash on your SV or H3V is on top of it. If you get a flash like this, you can tilt the top of the flash upward. Why is that important? Well, think about how we see the world. If we're outside during the day, the world is lit by the sun, which is above us. If we're outside at night, the world is lit by streetlights, which are above us. If we're inside at school or work and there are overhead lights in the ceiling, they are, once again, above us. So we always see the world being lit from above, and our brains think of lighting from above as being normal and flattering. You want to use your flash to replicate normal and flattering light so that it makes your subjects look as good as they can. So if you're in a space with a ceiling, you can bounce the flash off the ceiling and replicate that overhead light. Some flashes, also this one does not, but they have in addition to the tilting head, they have a swiveling head as well. So if you have a very high ceiling, like you're in a 60-foot high barn, or if you only have a wall because you're outside, you can swivel the head of the flash and tilt it, and then bounce the light off of a wall or a reflector or something like that. And that will give you an approximation of that overhead light, which can still be very flattering. There's another thing you can do with the Pentax SV and your flash, however, and I'm going to show you that right now. For just a handful of dollars, you can get something that's called a flash bar. And what the flash bar does is screw into the bottom of your camera, and then it can screw into an adapter for your flash, and then you run a cable either from that adapter or your flash to your X port like that. That adapter can now also swivel, so it gives you a whole other range of motion that you can use for sculpting the light from your flash. And if you're shooting, let's say, in portrait orientation, well, now your flash is above you and you can rotate it to use it as a bounce flash. You get just a whole bunch more control. But this is another way that you can use your flash if you don't have, say, this cold shoe adapter, and it's cheaper to buy a flash bar and an adapter, which it may well be. You can do that and then hold the flash off to the side when you take photos and have a whole lot of creative control over the light your flash provides. Okay, so that's flash use and a basic primer and technique for the Pentax SV H3V. So having talked about that, let's talk about the focusing screen. I will ask you guys to forgive me for my absolutely terrible artistic rendering of the focusing screen, but this is what you're going to see when you look through the viewfinder. This outer area that encompasses most of the screen is what's called a Fresnel lens, and it's got a bunch of concentric circles going out towards the edge, okay? And that's intentional. That makes the lighting on the focusing screen very even, so that the illumination in the corners is just as bright as the illumination in the center. It helps mitigate for light ray roll-off in your lenses, which you can see in your images. And in old-timey viewfinders that did not have a Fresnel, it translates into those as well. Having used cameras older than this that did not have a Fresnel, they get very dark in the corner. So at any rate, this has a Fresnel matte field here. It's primarily a matte field, but the Fresnel lines do come through. Then this central ring right here has a bunch of diagonal lines like this. It's a different type of matte field. And then this central area here it's a microprism-ish collar. It's not like, it doesn't look like a full-on microprism to me. It looks more like a different texture of matte field. But I will say that the focus on this collar here does snap into focus a little bit differently than do the other two fields. Okay, so this is what you're going to see. Lines here for focusing aid, Fresnel microprism-ish type collar. So how do we use this? Let's say that you're taking a photo of your friend over here. Okay, friend, no, he's going to smile more. He's happy. Okay, so you got your friend here. And over here you have a scenic vista. To use this, the focusing screen, what's going to happen is as you focus, your friend's just going to come into focus. He'll suddenly just like go from being blurry to more focus, perfect focus, blurry again if you focus past him, okay? So you can use this matte field to obtain focus. And if something is in focus on this matte field, it will be in focus on your film. Okay, I tried that. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not 100% certain I got it right. What else can I do? You could put this central part of your focusing screen over your friend's face and verify focus. And this looks a little bit different, and things snap in and out of focus a slightly different way. So it might be a really good way of doing that, and it might give you a much better focus with it, okay? But it's basically the same thing, and I'm having trouble really getting a good sense of whether or not the matte field is giving me good focus. The other thing you can do is take this outer collar, okay? Put the collar so that it's like here and here, and then you've got the collar over your friend's eyes, okay? Physically move the camera, point it in this orientation so the collar is over your friend's eyes, and then focus. And what's in here will snap into slightly better definition as it achieves focus. When you get focus, reorient the camera without changing the focus point and take your photo. So you can use each of these three areas in different ways when you focus your lens to obtain focus. And whichever one works the best for your eyes is the best one to do. And all you have to do is then make sure that you're looking at that proper area to obtain focus. Change your image composition to however you want it. Once you've done that, make sure your settings for aperture and shutter speed are correct and take your photo. And that's how you use the focusing screen. It is an absolutely delightful focusing screen to use and just a wonderful shooting experience. So the next thing we're going to talk about, understanding how to focus this lens, is how to actually take a picture. We're going to put it all together and show you. So this is a completely manual camera. It's going to do nothing for you that you don't tell it to do explicitly. You're going to take your light meter app on your smartphone or your handheld light meter, or you're just going to look at the scene and go, yeah, sure, these settings sound great. That's actually what I do. And you set your aperture to whatever you want it to be, and you dial in your shutter speed to whatever you want it to be. And let's assume that your light meter or your gut tells you 1/125th and f/5.6 is going to give you a proper exposure. You next obtain focus on whatever your subject is. Okay, great. Take the picture. That's it. That's the process of taking a photo. Figure out your settings. Make sure they're in place on your shutter dial and aperture. Focus. Take the photo. Super easy. What about a double exposure? You can do that with this camera, and I'm going to explain how right now. So, first thing I'm going to do is show you the physical process of taking a double exposure, and then I'll explain how to do the exposure compensation and the science behind it, okay? So with the double exposure, you're going to start by flipping the rewind lever out and then just rewinding in the slack until you get to resistance. Don't crank it. Don't try to force it. Just go until it stops, okay? You're going to then take your photo. Next, you're going to hold this. You're going to push and hold the film rewind button on the underside, like that. Push and hold it. And now you're going to advance the film like that. Okay. You're now going to take your second photo and advance your film. Now you're done and can go on, right? Not quite. Next, set your aperture to the smallest setting, the shutter speed to 1/1000th, and either put on your lens cap or put the front of your lens over your leg and take a dead frame. Here's why. When you push and hold the rewind button down during this process, you disengage a bunch of gearing. When you advance the film after your second photo, it takes a moment for all of that gearing to re-engage, so that double exposure is only going to part-way advance. And then you take your second frame and, oh, hey, there's an overlap. You don't want that. So you set your aperture to the largest number, smallest opening, go to the fastest shutter speed, cover the lens, and you take that dead frame, because that then makes sure that the film is pulled fully out and away from the shutter area and that your next photo doesn't overlap it, okay? So that's the mechanics of the shutter speed. Let's talk about the science. Film is designed to receive a certain number of photons to give you a proper exposure, okay? And if you give it too many photons, it's going to turn out to be what's called dense, thick, or dark. Your negative will physically be dark. It has received too much light. And in traditional darkroom printing, That's going to result in low contrast, and it's going to really increase your print times, especially since you're going to have to throw in some contrast enhancing filters. In digitization, it's going to give you a ton of digital noise and very low contrast. So you want to, with your double exposure, still give the film the proper amount of light. And to do that, if you're going to put 2 exposures on the same frame, you've just got to cut that light in half. And you've got 2 ways that you can do that. So you've got your light meter, and it tells you 1/125th that f5.6 is a proper exposure for the photo you want to take. But you're going to do a double exposure. You've got to cut each exposure in half. We're going to start with the shutter speed. Take a guess at what setting we're going to use to cut the light in half. And if you said 1/250th, you'd be correct. These being fractions, the higher number is half the time of the next number next to it. 1/1000th is half as long as 1/500th. 1/15th is twice as long as 1/30th. Each time you make an adjustment here, it's called a stop. Okay. And so to get half the light, you have to adjust 1 stop. So 2 frames at 1/250th and f5.6 is a double exposure that would be equivalent to your proper exposure of 1/125th at f5.6. Okay. But oh, hey, I'm using the flash, so I'm stuck at 1/50th. Now, fortunately, 1/50th and f5.6, that's a proper exposure, but I want to do a double exposure with my flash. You can also control the light with your aperture. So each one of these marked numbers is a stop, just like each one of these marked numbers is a stop. They're not it's confusing at first, but that's the unit of measure that film works in, is stops. f5.6 is 1 stop faster than f8, and it's twice as much light, which means f8 is 1 stop slower than f5.6 and half as much light. So you can keep your shutter speed the same, whether it's the flash sync or 1/1000th would be another good example, and cut the light in half by adjusting your aperture 1 stop. And now you can still get your double exposure and give yourself a proper exposure that way. Okay. There you go. That's double exposure science in a nutshell. 2 frames, half as much light for each. Do the holdy thing and film advancing in dead frame, and you've got your double exposure. And with that, that's everything we've got to talk about with the Pentax SV. So thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in whatever camera manuals come next. Hey everyone, if that video was helpful, check out this other video that might be helpful too.